Here we go. So Elliots Beach in South Cedar. I'll be going back next year. It's just lovely. And we're going to start with a wet sky and cerulean blue. So let me move this one out the way. Cover up my painting and get some cerulean blue on the go. But we don't want too much because it's a very small piece of sky. And we don't want the paint too wet because we're going to wet the sky to get it in between those little fluffy white clouds. And I'm just going to test. There we go. That looks good. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You can see the sky. And I want to, when we're wetting, definitely going to have to wet right over the branches because I want the sky to go behind the leaves. I'm going to wet just down to the horizon line. And just back behind the branches. Now we're going to have a lot of leaves and trees and stuff in here, so don't worry too much about back here. And it's quite a small space for the sky. I'm going to get a smaller brush, maybe my number 4. What I'm doing is I'm getting not too watery paint on my brush, and I'm just using the very point of my brush to add some blue sky. Now don't worry about the tree. We're going to paint that nice dark grey. And I'm going to come in here. I always like to get a bit of blue in the corner. And just wetting up my blue a little bit more. There's quite a bit of summery blue over here. And I'm going to come over the distant mountains there because they're going to come in a darker blue, but I always like to have some blue behind them so that they've already got a layer going. And just make sure that I don't have any straight lines at the end here where the trees are. What I want is mostly clouds at the top of the sky and more just sort of blue at the bottom of the sky. I'm going to take just a little bit more, just streak it along here a little bit, just so I make sure I've got some blue at the top. Now that needs to soak in and form some nice fluffy summer clouds. And we can work on the beach while that's starting to dry, and then we'll have to give it a quick dry before we start putting the mountains behind it. But it's good, it can just sit there for a moment, soak in, let the clouds go fluffy, and I'll give you a moment, and then we'll mix up a couple of the beige and the grey for the sand. So you just put in your sky. Remember, if your blue is too wet, it will go all over the place. So your blue has to be a little bit less wet than the wet background. But if your background's not wet enough, then your clouds won't be fluffy, they'll be hard. And you can often fix that with just a wet brush, very gently using the tip. If your clouds do get too hard, you can take the tip of your wet brush and you can just soften the tip gently to make sure you don't have a hard edge. And as long as your paper's wet, you can put in a few more little blue sky bits if it's still wet. I'm just going to soften that up with a wet brush. Now when I arrived at the beach on that day, it was a fairly grey sky, but the longer I sat there, the bluer it got. So when I finally took a picture close to the end, it was quite a lovely blue summery sky. Okay. So you should have had enough time to get your sky in. If you're taking much longer, you're fiddling too much. So, put your final little bit of sky in. Don't fuss with it too much. Let it do its own thing. And then let's mix up some sand color for the beach area. Now we want the lovely warm sand color first. So I'm going to mix that up in my warm tray. So we're going to use raw sienna mostly. Grab my raw sienna. I'm kind of liking my raw sienna light. It's a lovely yellowy raw sienna. And if you don't have raw sienna, you can use yellow ochre. And whatever raw sienna you have is good. Or yellow ochre, that's fine. And I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to that to warm it up even more. And then a little touch of Quinacridone Rose. I want it to be a lovely warm and quite a bit of water. So I want it to be quite a lovely warm color. Now for the cooler gray on the sand, they're going to mix wet and wet, so you need them both ready to go, not too strong. I can use my cerulean that's there. I'm going to use Cobalt Blue and the raw sienna and the burnt sienna. The burnt sienna will warm up the grey and the raw sienna will keep it nice and light. I want to make sure we've got enough Cobalt Blue that it's not green grey, that it's a blue grey, because the raw sienna will turn it towards green. If it's too green, add a bit more burnt sienna and a bit more cobalt. And water and test. I'm going to add the tiniest touch of Quinacridone Rose to that grey as well, as I do want it to be a nice warm grey. It's not a huge difference, but it just picks it up a little bit, makes it a little bit warmer. Now they look very different on the palette. So when we're using them, then we're going to put down the first one very, very watery, and we're going to just come up against it with the cooler grey so that they mix wet and wet. So we have a fusion of the two. On dry paper, we don't need the paper wet for this. So mix up your colours, make them good and watery. Okay, let's move my trays back. Make sure you've got enough paint. So what we're working on next is this beach area here, the light, warm sand, and then quickly putting in the cool sand. Now all of the rocks are going to be put in later. We're not going to put them all in at once. They will go on top of this when it's dry. And I'll zoom back in. Get this nice and straight. Right, so a fairly big brush, because when you're working wet and wet with your first layers, I'm just going to grab my number 10 brush. You don't want to be fiddling around with a tiny brush. I'm going to load it up, roll it in the lovely warm sandy color. I'm going to put that color on first. I'm going to put it along the edge of the beach. Make sure I got plenty on there's some under the tree here, plenty on my brush. And then I want to clean my brush dry it. Now be careful not to dip a really dripping wet brush in your paint, because sometimes then you've got too much water. And I'm going to get, before this dries, I want to get the bluer grey and put that coming up against the lighter, warmer grey colour, or beige. And I'm going to grab a little bit more of the beige. I'm just going to let that mix with the other grey. And again, this is a very first layer. It's a quick wet in wet. You don't want to fuss too much with it. We will need a little bit more of the beige for the waves. I mean, you could put it in now. It does work a little better putting it wet in wet when we do the ocean. There's also some rocks sticking out in the ocean here, and it doesn't matter when you paint them, but I'm thinking maybe that little warm area of rock, sort of a beige color. Maybe I'll just pop that in now while I have some of that color on my brush. And sometimes things like that just help me not forget to actually paint around that rock when I put the blue in. Now this first layer should be pretty light. You don't want it to be too dark. And especially because you're going to have some green leaves and stuff coming over it here. And darker leaves. So we've reached a point now where we want these two colors that you've just put down, wet and wet, to soak in and meld together. And the sky should be coming up nearly dry. And we're going to make sure the sky is really dry before we go on and put these little mountains in there, you know, Ladysmith and beyond, just coming down here. And then we will put the ocean in, and we'll get all of the stuff that's underneath the tree trunk. So I'm going to dry mine while you do yours. Mostly you just want to make sure that your sky is dry so that you get a nice crisp edge to your mountains back there. They're very, very subtle. You can't see much of them. So what we're going to work on now are just these mountains in the background here. They're pretty light, and we're just going to use Ultramarine Blue, and we're going to paint the whole thing at once, all the foreground ones, the background ones, and then when that's dry, we're going to make the foreground ones a little bit darker, maybe just a touch greener. But Ultramarine Blue is a good one, as long as you don't use it too dark. So on top of my sort of grey there, it's always useful to use your colours that are on there. It helps just mute your other colours a little bit. You don't always want everything really, really bright, and you don't want your ultramarine blue too strong because they're really distant mountains. That's too strong still. And I'm going to add a little bit of grey and try it again. See, when you see mountains in the distance, they're very close to the sky color. I'm adding a little bit more water. See how watery this is? When you actually get it on the paper, it's quite strong. I'm going to need quite a small brush. I think my number 4 will be a good one. Roll my brush in that color. And they are very, through that, let's see, even zoom in a bit. We're looking through this little arch in the tree. So there's going to be right here a green tree. So I don't have to worry. I'm actually just going to smudge that with my finger so it sort of goes into the distance. I'm not going to worry about the branches because they will be darker. See, any time you're going to see through the branches or through the foliage, you do want to be able to see some background there. And you'll notice they're not that much darker than the sky, just a little bit. We don't want them bright, bright blue. I'm going to pull that, I'm going to use my wet brush to just pull that back. I'm going to go behind those trees. Now I have to dry that again before I can put in the mountains that are a little bit closer. And if you look at this picture, I mean, they're quite a greeny blue. You see, this is a very grey blue through here. And they want to push them right into the background. So I'm going to dry that while you do yours. It's a very small piece of the painting and it doesn't take long. You don't want to take too long over it. And because I worked on dry paper, it dried really quickly. There wasn't much paint involved in any of that. Now, interestingly, zooming even more, I don't know if you can see, but there is actually some land even lower down here that's just so slightly darker than the sort of mountain area behind it. Now that blue that I have there, I'm just going to add the tiniest touch of yellow to it and a tiny touch of burnt sienna to it. I don't want it too bright. Just want it a little bit darker, a little bit more burnt sienna. And I'm going to test that over the top of this one. Yeah, so I'm going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue. Test that again. And that's what I want. It's a little bit greener, a little bit grayer, just stands out a bit more. I want my number 2 brush. I want a tiny brush with such a tiny little spot that we're going to work on. I need to give you time. I know I need to give you time to mix up your color. So I can say it again. It was the same like ultramarine blue mix that was there. A little bit more ultramarine blue added. Then I added a tiny, I just put the tip of my brush in the yellow, make it a little bit green, and the tip of my brush in the burnt sienna to make it a little bit gray, and test it. But see how watery and light this is, because it is in the distance. It just needs to be a little bit darker than the previous layer, and your previous layer must be dry. It must be dry. Otherwise this will it'll just bleed into it. You won't see any difference. And I'm actually basically just testing mine to make sure it's the right color. And because it's mostly ultramarine and burnt sienna, I could just take this straight off with a Kleenex if it wasn't the right color. It is the right color, but I just want to demonstrate. If I just press that on there, I can take it straight off again if I felt that it wasn't right, but it was fine. That was just for demonstration purposes. That little tiny bit of land, that's sort of where Ladysmith is going south there. Probably getting more towards Saltaire. Or even, I don't even know what comes next. And where it goes behind these trees, you can't really see anything. So I'm just having to make that bit up because I know I'm going to put branches and stuff over it. But I can see further along here, there's a bit more definition. Now this is all background stuff, so is quick, it's light. And a little bit more dark ultramarine just there where it's going to poke through the branches. And there you go. Not too much fuss. Right, let's mix up the ocean color. And as you can see, all of these blues in the background are all very similar. The ocean's nice and bright, it's reflecting the sky. We want to keep it really, really bright. In these waves right here, we're going to have a little bit of the warm sandy color, wet and wet with the waves. Over here, we've got some rock color. We can put that in now. We can put it in later. It's just reflecting from the rocks. Sometimes it's easier to put that in later when you do the rocks. You've got the rock color. I'm not adding this log that was sitting here. It just didn't seem to add anything to the composition. If you want to put it in, that's absolutely fine. But I just left it out. I thought it was better without that little extraneous detail. So let's mix up. Let's mix up the ocean color so it's going to be kind of bright. We're going to use the Cerulean Blue again. Get a bigger brush. I don't like that Cerulean Blue. I like the other one. And we're going to add a little bit of cobalt just to warm up that cerulean just a little bit. And this is for the ocean. We don't want it too dark. What we probably would like to do when we do the ocean is use some water. This is just my scrap paper. So use some water to dilute out the ocean in the middle where it's very light. Like put your water on first or your blue on first, and then use some water to dilute it out. See what I'm doing? I put a little bit of blue, some water, then a little bit more blue, and that keeps it really nice and light, kind of in the center. The other thing we'll need, if you have some left, is a little bit of the warm sand color. I'll just grab a little bit more, make a little bit more. We only need a tiny bit. It's just, I think it works better using it wet and wet for the waves rather than, you can put it underneath dry, it's fine. I'm going to start with the sandy color, my little brush, start with my number 4, and I'm going to put a few like sandy colored waves in near the shore. Just a couple, we don't need many. And I'm going to take my bigger brush, my number 8, and I am going to wet a little bit of this ocean first so I don't have it too dark. Then grab my blue that I just made, and I'm going to have that blue there. It is the time of day when it's a little bit of a white stripe close to the horizon there, and I got to remember I have that little rock coming out here. Back and forth horizontal strokes. There's rocks here, so I have to be careful there. And on this edge here where it's going to come under the trees, I just want to use a wet brush to scoop that back. Take my brush now. And I can leave some little white waves coming up to the shore. I've got those little beige, warm, sandy bits. Get a bit more water on my brush. Now I don't need hardly any color out here. The sea is very light and I'm going to have leaves and stuff on the top, so I don't really need to worry about that at all. And there will be some reflection from the rocks. I'm not going to bother about that right now. I'll put that in later. Also, if we want any darker wave patterns, we can either put it in now with a tiny little bit of ultramarine, or we can put it in later. I'm grabbing a little bit of ultramarine on my brush, just a tiny bit on my number 2 brush. And I'm just adding some little waves. They're kind of nicer if they go in wet and wet. And there's a little bit more wave pattern just back here. Very, very minimal. Not much over there. So everything about the background has to be really minimal. Not much to see. And light, nice and light. And the next thing, now, I think in my notes we did the tree trunk earlier. It doesn't matter when you do the tree trunk, whether you do it earlier when you do the beach or when you do the background, but we're going to put a light grey background on the trees so it's underneath the dark bark. If you can see here, there is you know, all kinds of lichen on the trees and texture in the bark. There's a lovely light place here that looks best if you put the warm sandy color on first, then the dark, and then wash it back with a brush when it's dry, because it gives it that lovely soft glow. So we have all that kind of light gray texture in the tree trunk, which I've overemphasized because I could see it much more clearly when I was sitting next to the tree. And the photo always flattens everything and darkens everything. When you're actually sitting there looking in daylight at something, you see way more detail, way more brighter colors. So I've made it more like I actually saw the tree rather than how the camera has sort of flattened it out. I'll make sure you so let's mix up some light grey for the trunk underneath. We've got all of that blue there that's very useful for mixing up a light grey. We can add a little bit more ultramarine, cobalt, a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of Quinacridone Rose to warm it up, make a warmer grey, water, even a little bit of cerulean. So the 3 blues we've used are cobalt, cerulean, ultramarine, and some burnt sienna to grey it down. Make a grey, and then a little bit of Quinacridone Rose to just warm it up. Just a tiny bit. And we have a lovely light grey for the underneath of the trunk. And we're also going to use that for the parts that are in sunlight. We're going to use that lovely beige color. So the raw sienna with a little bit of the Quinacridone Rose in it. Make a little bit more. And find my cloth. Oh, there we go. Let's see what I think I want my number 6 brush for now. Get a brush that you can control. And I'm thinking about this one here, because there is a lovely patch of light on this tree trunk and coming up here. I'm actually even going to get just raw sienna on its own and coming up here. This is all going to be underneath the dark that we're going to put on there. So I'm putting that warm color on first, and then I'm going to take straight away that cooler grey. I'm going to let them blend wet and wet together. Now this is just your first layer. This is not your final tree trunk layer at all. And you'll be surprised how light this layer looks when you start to put the dark tree trunk on. But for now, we'll put this on. Now also we've got to remember, in some places you might want some leaves coming over these tree trunks. So for instance up here I might want to put some leaves there, so I'm going to actually just leave a space and work on all of that dark after I've got those leaves on. This one here, I'm going to start with the darker grey and grab some of the light pinky colour, sort of for where the sun may be shining on the top of that. And then come down, and remember again we're going to have some leaves showing, so we don't need to do it all. Just taper it off to a bit of a point. I'm going to go to my bigger brush, 8, and the darker grey, because this is all darker here. I can put the paint on more quickly in the direction that the tree trunk grows. It was a very big maple tree. Lots of branches going off. It looks kind of clumsy, but it was a very, very big tree. And any of the areas can be filled in with leaves. And I'm going to, this branch here, it has quite a few leaves coming over it, and it doesn't have much light texture, so I'm just going to leave that one, and I'm going to put some of the leaves over the top. And these ones coming out here too, quite dark. So all I'm putting in is the underpainting for the ones that have a bit of texture. And then we want to put these rocks in too, because we're going to have some, let's see my notes. I can't remember if I put them in early or late. It doesn't really matter, but sometimes if you want them behind some of the leaves, it helps. But then if you want some of the leaves coming over the top, I might have to do the leaves first. Let me check my notes. I haven't really said about these rocks, and I do think maybe it's a good idea to put some of these light colored leaves in first, because these brownie colored ones come right over the top of the rocks and the background. So if we've got them in there, we can work the background around them and behind them. So we will be putting those in. And even though it was July, there were quite a few brown maple leaves on this tree. I guess because it's in rock. It was sitting in rock, very little water. So I guess some of the leaves are already very dry, and it makes a nice bit of warmth in the painting. So and right now the painting's really bland. There are no greens in it, there's no darks in it. It's very, very bland at the moment. Now, since I worked my tree trunk on dry paper, it's going to be dry enough by the time I get all of my leaf colors mixed up. And we need, look how many leaves there are around here. Let's get there's my painting, in my photo. So we've got to have really bright yellow. If you do this a nice lemon yellow in here and then let the green bleed into it, it will read correctly. Like even though you think this is green here, it's actually a really bright either lemon or Azo Yellow. Doesn't matter which one you use, but it's lovely to just put yellow in and let the green bleed into it. Then we need a very medium green. Same here, yellow and a medium green, a bit of a dark green here. We need the orangey brown for these leaves here and under here. And then over here, very, very, very dark green. So we need a number of colors ready, and we want to work a lot of them wet in wet. We can work the second knot in another layer, but you do want to try and work some of the green and yellow wet in wet so they bleed together nicely. Now let's cover up this, zoom back a bit, and start mixing some greens and some orangey browns. Let's see what we can get up to here. So I have here, this is a lemon yellow. Lemon yellow is quite a greenish yellow, so it's a good one to just put on there so it mixes with the green wet in wet. So I've got some lemon. It doesn't matter if you don't have lemon, just use a bright yellow, cadmium, azo, whatever you have. It will be fine. So for the rusty brown leaves, we definitely want to use some burnt sienna, but we can mix something with it to make it brighter. We can mix either a transparent orange or pyrrole orange, or I have here a quinacridone something orange. What's it called? Quinacridone burnt orange, kind of a lovely color. It's pretty much the same as burnt sienna and transparent orange. So grab some of those. And I'm going to grab some Azo Yellow too, because if you put that behind, like if I put that on and then grab straight away the darker orange, they can bleed together wet and wet and just give those darker leaves that sunny tinge to them. I add a little bit more, right, so that's all my sort of warm colors there. And then over here in this tray, I'll clean that up a little bit, get rid of a bit of the gray. So we want some bright greens. Now you can do a number of things for green. If you have a sap green, you can use it. Sap, and it depends on the brand. Daniel Smith's Sap Green is gorgeous, bright, transparent, absolutely lovely. But some other sap greens are really dull and dead, and I don't like them. So you decide what you've got that works really well. You can also use Ultramarine Blue with yellow. Any nice bright yellow will do, and that will give you a really gorgeous green. You can add more blue to that to make it darker. You can add burnt sienna to it to make it darker still. So let's take blue, burnt sienna, and some yellow. And I've got a nice dark, really dark green. You can use any of your other blues. Let's have some Indanthrone, or even some phthalo blue, and mix it with some yellow, and you'll get a really, really lovely deep green. So you've got so many options here. This one in the corner was my sap green, and Daniel Smith makes sap green they mix phthalo green. This is my phthalo green, and they mix it with quinacridone gold, It's why it's so gorgeous. I'm just grabbing my Quinacridone Gold. So Quinacridone Gold and Phthalo Green mixes you the most gorgeous, gorgeous sap green if you've got good quality pigments. If you don't, it doesn't always work. It depends on the quality. So here we go. We got a tray full of greens in all different values and shades. Sap green is just very convenient, and if you mix a little bit of ultramarine blue to it, you can darken it up immediately. So I like to have them all around the tray like that, so I can dip in and easily get some different greens as I go. And I might just mix some blues with them as I go, and I'm going to get a little bit more lemon ready here. And we're going to work on dry paper, and a lot of the time we're going to have wet in wet things happening. So this is when we really get into building the painting. And build it from left to right if you're right-handed. And look at if you've got your reference picture, look at your reference picture so you can sort of judge where the light leaves are supposed to be and where the dark leaves are supposed to be. I'm going to start over here and zoom in again. And hang on, so you can see where I'm starting. I'm going to start right over here with the yellow to start with. Grab I want my number 6 brush. And I want it nice and clean for the yellow, lemon yellow. And I'm going to put where I see the most bright leaves here, nice and wet, so I can work nicely wet in wet. Even as I'm looking at them right now, they're even warmer than lemon, so I'm going to grab some Azo Yellow as well. It doesn't matter if you go over some of these with the green, it's fine, it'll all blend in. And I'm going to put that lemon and that Azo on before I start with the darker green. And don't forget, you can go darker in another layer. There's some up here. I'm not going to worry about this tree trunk for now. We'll figure all that out later. Right, now I'm going to go into my medium green while this is still wet. And definitely going to get some down here close to the trunk. And I want a little bit more yellow down here, because I don't want any of this color to look flat. There's a lot of variety in the greens. I want them to blend wet in wet. I'll make sure I get a nice sharp edge to that tree trunk, and I can leave a little bit of white if I need to. And I'll put the branches on later. Now, I'm not going to paint over the lemon or the yellow. I'm painting just up to the edge. Just up to the edge of it. And I will be going a little bit darker in places, but not yet. I've got to get this on first. When I come next to the tree trunk, I'm using linear strokes. When I come next to the yellow, I'm using kind of more dotty strokes. And I want a bit more yellow. And I have a bit of green on my brush now. It's okay, I've got a yellowy green. And this yellow is drying a bit, that's fine. I'll just get a bit sharper edge to my leaves, and that's okay. I don't mind that. Coming next to the trunk, a little bit more linear with my strokes. I've gone over the trunk a little bit, but it's okay. It's going to be darker. Now I'm going into my darker blue, one that's mixed a bit more with ultramarine up here, because it gets darker up in this corner. But there is still some light green up there, so I'm also going to go some light green as well. And this yellow is drying up more, so it's not bleeding as wet in wet. Again, linear strokes near to the trunk. And grabbing a little bit more dark and just dotting in the dark into that light green. A little bit in here. And a little bit here. It's just dotting in a little bit of dark. And there will be some tree branches coming over that too. You see, I grab the dark on my brush and I just let it dot from the tip of the brush, just very gently let it fall down into the wet paint, just to give it a little bit more, grab a little bit more darker paint. Remember, the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna make it a bit darker. I'm just going to go a little bit darker in this corner. You don't want to overdo it. That's just like the side of the tree. There's not much going on there. I'm going back now to my lemon. And once you get the feel of this, you can sort of work your way through the tree. Just in this little branch here, there's a bit of light. I'm going to leave that to just soak in a little bit. And I want to, before you sort of go doing your own leaves and stuff, I just want to demonstrate the rusty ones. Again, I want the bright yellow. I got to check where the rusty ones are. There's a little patch here, and there they don't have the yellow, but over here, I'm going to put a little bit of the yellow on first. So that's kind of like the sunlight on the edge of those rusty leaves. And I'm going to grab my brown and orange. There's a few up the top here. And I'm just going to let the browny orange just touch that yellow. And put a few of those rusty colored leaves in. Now, the important thing to have is some blue sky showing through. Don't obscure a lot of the background. I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium red to that orange. And the reason is I'm looking at my reference photo, and as those browny orange leaves come down here, they are a little bit more red. So I've put a little bit of cadmium red in with them. A little bit of cadmium red, I've got to grab a little bit of Azo Yellow now. And now I'm going to look all over and the sun come right down here to the beach. I'm looking all over the reference picture to see where are those pinky reddish orangey leaves. I'm making sure I put all of those in first. Now there were some over here, a little bit more of a group rather than a dotted area. And that's why I left this trunk kind of unpainted, because over the top of the trunk, not the trunk, the branch here, before I get the rest in, the leaves actually come over that branch. And I'm putting the rusty orange and then the green. And then the light green, so they're sort of coming out from the trunk. And I'm making those, putting the darker one up here now. I had that light yellow. So there's quite a few of these leaves over the top of the trunk here. This one's slightly more yellow. And you don't need to make them too much like maple leaves. If you have just a few that look a bit more like maple leaves over on the right when you finish up, that's enough. You don't have to really fuss with any of the others, making them look like maple leaves. They'll be fine. What I'm actually doing is just putting in these individual ones, and then I'm going to fill it up with more like I have on the left here. So this is going to take a little bit of time, this filling in the leaves, and you need to really kind of look where you're going as well, because there's things that you need to remember. Just past this branch here, you need to remember there's actually a fir tree coming from this island over here, or the land back here. And I'm just grabbing some of the bluey green, and I think it's a good time to put that in before I completely forget that it's there, and forget to put it in the picture. And when I put the dark on, I will be doing the rest of that branch. I'm popping that fir tree in now, and behind I've got some really light, got some light leaves here, and then the fir tree and the background behind it. So let's put the light ones in. Keep your reference picture handy so you can see what you're doing, so you don't forget where everything is. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be quite sketchy if you like. And a lot of it will make more sense once we get the branches over the top of everything. So on the other side of here, there's a bit more green here too on the other side. And there's a big branch going off in back here. So go between your greens, like picking up your dark green, your light green, your orangey, brown. Sometimes don't be too detailed, and other times you can add a little bit more detail. And don't forget, once we get all the branches in, it's going to make a lot more sense. I need a bit more lemon now. I'm sort of running out of lemon. And coming down here, there's some nice light between the leaves here. And I can go into these sort of sap green. What I'm thinking over here is I need a little bit more beach over here than I put, because I need to have beach showing between my leaves. I should have had more here, so it's not too late for me to put a little bit of beach colour in there. I'll mix some up. And I'm going to use the pinky sand color because that will look so lovely with the green. The pink and the green will be complementaries. Take that in here. And there's a few rocks back here. Mustn't forget that there's some rocks there. I'm just going to put a little bit of the pinky color on the rocks for, I'll be going over them with grey, but I just want that underneath. And also behind here is going to be some dark behind the leaves. So and later some shadow. But let's put some pink on first. I don't need to stop and dry that because I have a lot of areas I can work on with putting the leaves in while I wait for that to dry a little bit. I have an area up here that I can work on. And don't fuss too much about some of the areas, you know, just get your color in. I've got my lemon yellow. Going to quickly grab my sap green. A little bit more lemon yellow. There's just some light between these leaves. I'm just putting the lemon in there, and I'm going to grab some of that dark green, and there's sort of a little bit of dark green leaves here. I'm coming over, there's going to be some branches coming over. Not too much fuss, just let the colours bleed together, wet and wet. And do remember that where there's background behind it, you need a little bit of space sometimes to see the background too. So always start most of it with your lemon. Like there's quite a bit of light coming through here and up here. And then second one is your medium green. And we can see under a lot of these leaves, we can see the rocks. So don't obscure everything with your leaves. A little bit of dark. I'm going to zoom back, and I'm going to give it a bit of a dry, because before we go too much further, although I'm not worried about the branches, I just want to show you before we go too much further how we're going to construct the branches when we get to that point where you don't have to worry too much about putting your green leaves where the branches are going to be. And sometimes it's helpful to stop and construct a few branches before you go on, if it helps, especially before we go down here. But I'm just going to dry what I've got so I can just show you how I can construct branches over the top of what we've got here. Give me a minute. All right, I'll let you like work on your leaves while I mix up some nice dark branch color. And my favorite, you know, the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, because they're so easy to lift off, and we're going to want to do a little bit of lifting off to get the texture in the bark. So let's put my cloth over the top. And just in the middle here, let's put the burnt sienna and then some ultramarine blue. And not much water and lots of pigment so that we get a good dark color for the branches and the tree trunk. A little bit more ultramarine blue, keep it nice and dark. I always use my bigger brush for mixing. I really should use one of my very cheap brushes for mixing, but I just forget, because it does wear them out to keep digging in the paint with them. But you know, these brushes are so great, they don't seem to wear out at all. So let's get that out of the way. Right. Oh, first of all, I'll use one of my riggers, roll it in that color. So my riggers are going to be great for doing the thinner branches. There are some thinner ones coming off of the trunk here, and they sort of, now we don't want to have the whole branch. Zoom in. What I'm doing is I'm taking the branch out and then I'm stopping, and then you can see it again. So there's like leaves in front of it. There's another branch that sort of comes up here, and same thing, just going to stop, and there you can see them underneath and in between the leaves. Now you don't have to do this right now. All I wanted to demonstrate was how that is going to make a difference to how everything looks. You know, you're putting all of these leaves in right now and it kind of looks a bit too leafy. But once you start putting in branches and little bits of branches and dark spots between the leaves, it doesn't look so overly green. You don't have so much green going on. So back here, there are the branches back here, going behind this branch, coming out in front of this branch, coming down. One here. You see what I mean? You're going to start, when you do get round to doing your branches, you're going to start breaking up your leaves and constructing something for them to all hang on. And it'll just make it look more real. For instance, this bit we did down here, we can have some little branches connecting all of these leaves that we had down here. These little, you know, brown ones. There's also somewhere here, there's quite a bigger branch going under here somehow. And so forth, and then they start to take shape. And of course we've got all of the dark to put on the tree trunk, and sometimes when these are drier, a little bit of that dark and mix it with the green. I just mixed a bit of that dark with the green, so I can put in a few more dark leaves here and there. and darker patches, give it a bit more dimension. Now let's pull back a little bit. And then when all this is dry, these leaves here, we can start to put in these rocks that are behind these branches and behind here too. But there are quite a few lighter leaves coming through here, so I want to get those in first. It's a lot of back and forth. I paint back and forth when I paint, because otherwise if you just do the green all in one go, you kind of lose track of where everything else is supposed to be, where the branches are supposed to be, where the background's supposed to be. So I paint in bits, you know, I'll paint a bit of the leaves, a bit of the branches, and then a bit of the background, so that I don't lose track of where things are supposed to be. And I'm going to put like these leaves in here now, and then I will be able to put in all of those rocks behind, and I can find my way through there before I completely lose myself. I'm going to get a little bit more bluey green, because one thing I do want to do is coming down to these rocks here, you can kind of see the fir trees. So I want to get those in before I forget where they are, before I lose them. There's one coming down here. And I can form the edge of these rocks over here with the dark firs behind them. And a little bit more here too. And I went quite dark with that. I mixed a little bit of that brown that I made with the ultramarine blue and the dark green, and made sure I got that background in, so that makes these reddy brown leaves then look a little bit brighter when I get that dark green behind them. Makes them stand out a little bit more. I could have probably gone a little bit brighter with the bronze, the browny coloured leaves. They look, now I've got the green in, they look a bit dull. But I won't worry. Not much I can do about that now. I've put them in there. Right, I'm going to get a bit more lemon yellow. Seem to go through that very fast. And I'm coming in this little area here. And I want to be very careful. I don't want to, you know, obscure everything here. And I definitely want to get all this lovely bright yellow that the sun is shining through the leaves here. And coming down here too, bright yellow. It's amazing how bright the yellow is. When you start putting the other colours in, you realise that it's even brighter than you thought. At least I do anyway. I'm already thinking I should have made the browny colour brighter. Right, and then go into my medium green. Just grabbing my sap green for my medium green. It's convenient, it's easier. If you do buy a sap green because you want one, If you don't have one, I do highly recommend the Daniel Smith one. So many other sap greens are not nice at all. A little bit comes over the branch here. Some comes from behind here, I notice. That's why it's really good to just, as you're painting, look at your reference photo all the time. You can't discover everything all in one go. It's little bits at a time. I'm noticing these leaves coming out from behind here that I didn't even think about earlier. I didn't even really know they were there. And as we come further down here, you can see more of the beach behind the leaves. So leave your spaces, don't close it all up. There's quite a lot of leaves next to the trunk. But you can see some beach here. And there's a little bit of branch. I've kept that more open. And then now this is dry over than the left side, so I'm going to add a bit more dark now that that's more dry, so I can have a little bit more dark definition back here. Now I have got enough in now that I can do the rocks, the tree trunks, and a few of the branches before going too much over this side, because I want to finish a lot of the tree on this left hand side before I get too far into the right hand side here. So I'm going to let you catch up. I'm going to let this sort of I don't want to go too fast because I want my colours to blend. I'm going to grab a little bit of the dark green just to put a little bit of dark in here. And then of course there will be branches. And there will be some grey rock colour back here. So I'm going to let you catch up. As soon as that's soaked in enough and blended wet in wet, I will dry that with the hairdryer so that we can work on the background rocks and the tree trunk, because we want to get the trunk in and more of these branches before we do some of the greenery over the other side. Okay, so you catch up with me. Be back with you in a minute. I think you're all painting away at your leaves and they can take a long time. They're probably the most detailed part of this painting, getting all the leaves in. But if you've got to a point where you can leave your leaves for a little bit and work on the tree trunks and the tree branches and the rocks, it's a really good time to do that, because you can come back to the leaves if you've got the main ones in that go over the rocks here. So I'm going to mix up some colors for the rocks and for the tree trunk. Pretty much what we've been using. The Ultramarine Blue and the Burnt Sienna are great ones for all of it. And also a little bit of Cobalt Blue if you want a gentler grey. I'll get my palettes back. I've got lots of colors in my palettes now that are very, very useful. And so I've got this lovely brown here. Let's use my old brush. That would be a good thing to do. So this was my Ultramarine Blue and the Burnt Sienna, and that's a great one for the the trunk of the tree. You can add more blue. You can add a bit of cobalt if you wanted a gentler grey on the trunk some places. You can add more ultramarine if you want it darker. You can add a little bit more burnt sienna if you want it a little bit browner. And you can wash those colours off if you feel you've gone too dark with them. And these colours are great for the branches too. Now the rocks in the background, I'm going to grab a space here where my yellow was. So the rocks in the background are a little bit gentler grey, and you can do that with your cobalt, make it a little gentler, and the burnt sienna, and a little bit of the raw sienna just makes a lighter grey, and that's good for the, even a little bit of the rose, too much. Water, a bit more water, a bit more water. So I'm just making a bit more of a gentle sandy grey for the rocks in the background. I'm adding a bit more raw sienna to that, a bit more sandy colour. And they'll have some reflections too. Just give it a test. I could add even a little bit more raw sienna to that. A little bit more cobalt. Back and forth until you get what you want. Great, okay. Move those over here. Small brush, I'm going to use my number 2 brush because I'm going to start with those little tiny rocks. Here we go. And my very sort of light, warm grey. And I'm going to have those rocks coming out. Now I can always wash back with this grey. It's all washable, lift off colours. And it's easier to put them on dark and wash them back, so that you get at least get them dark enough in some places. They're very small. It's very small area, so it's hard to get much definition just in your first brush strokes. For instance, this little rock back here, I'm going to go with my 0 brush and a little bit more brown on my brush. I've already put a little bit of and a little bit of brown, a little bit of green. I'm going to tip it in the brown, tip it in the green, and they're sort of, they've probably got a little bit of seaweed on the top, so I'm using that sort of browny green on the top, just defining them a little bit more. And I'm going to take that darker brown with my little 0 brush and just define these ones a little bit more. And back to my light grey. I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and I'm going to come over here under these branches. A little bit of water on my brush. Now the middle of these rocks kind of goes a little bit lighter. I've already got that light colour on there. I'm starting a little bit of water and spreading out that grey. And then taking a bit more dark grey as I come closer to the water's edge. Now it's very likely that when this is dry, I might do a little bit more work on these. I'm going to add a little bit of green to that grey. I'm just grabbing from my tree colour and mixing it with my grey. Now, I'm not going to put the reflections in yet because everything will meld together too much. Get all just all one color and it won't be defined. So we'll get the rocks in first. A little bit darker along the bottom. And now that this one's dried a little bit, I'm going to lift a little bit of the color off just to give a little bit of light and dark to these rocks. And the rock next to it now, because it's a bit drier, I can put it in a little bit more definition. And I'm going quite dark now because as they come out under here, there's some quite dark spots in between the leaves back here. Grabbing some of the darker color. I don't want to be doing too much fuss on the rocks back there, but we do want to get them so that they are dark enough and they have a little bit of definition so people know that they're rocks. And one of the very last things that we'll do is we will put these shadows on that come under the tree. This is the photograph here. These bluey green shadows. That will be the very, very last thing that we do. And also we're going to put a bit of this texture in here. But we're not going to do that yet. Just to tell you that that's something that will happen. And that will help. As soon as that's dry, I'm going to put just a little bit more detail on those rocks. Just a tiny bit. And also, eventually, a little bit of reflection from the rocks too. But we'll get the tree trunks in first, using that nice dark grey brown color that I've got, and leaving a little bit of texture, but we can pull some of the texture off later when the paint's dry, and we don't have to be too obvious with the texture while it's like this. Now there are quite a few sort of dots here, and that's sometimes easiest to do with like a dry brush. I'm drying my brush on the towel. I'm going to sort of drag it over here, coming upwards in that direction of the tree growth. So it's just dry brush. Now I've got a little bit more paint on my brush, and I'm filling in close to the corner because I don't like the corners to be too light, and the tree is not light in the corner. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to that browny grey that I made. And I want that to be nice and dark over here too. I'm wiping my brush off again, so I got a dry brush again, and I'm going to use it to get a little bit more texture in the trunk and fill in with the point of my brush, fill in a little bit of this. So I'm alternating between dry brush and more paint. So sort of putting the dry brush in to get the texture coming up the tree. And the more you drag your brush, the more texture you're going to get, and the drier your brush will become. Then I'm going to grab some like paint, so it's a wet brush, and put that in darker in a lot of places, especially on the edges of the tree trunk. And you want to get a lovely dark sharp edge to the tree trunk. There's actually another tree trunk back here that again I may not have noticed when I was first putting the paint on. And it doesn't matter if you don't get it exactly like the photograph. As it goes closer up the top of the tree, you don't see as much detail, so I'm filling it in a little bit more. There are some sort of little curves in the trees. I'm sort of trying to maneuver my brush around those little curves. Give it a little bit of shape. And you can mix, I'm going to mix a little bit of the green in with the, all I did was just grab some green and mix it in with the grey that I have. A little bit more green. And this big branch up here is quite a greeny, dark greeny colour, so much more in shade, so we don't see so much light on this one. I'm going to wash my brush off and get a little bit more just grey. It gets a little bit lighter here. No, I'm definitely not doing all of the little details, but we can work them up over time. Kind of like a big lump on the tree there. And we can also wash some back at some point. It's very light at the moment, and I maybe, when that's dry, I will probably want to go over that with a bit of a wash to darken up some of that texture. But right now I'm just going to let that be, and then I can come back and wash over that and get it a little darker. I'm mixing up a little bit more of the blue, ultramarine blue, and the burnt sienna to get a nice dark grey brown. And we're going to go up this branch here, just going around some of those leaves that I left. And carefully, just carefully painting around them. Remembering where the branch comes, it kind of comes down here. And again, if this one is too dark, I'm going to lift off afterwards. I think it actually has a few more leaves in front of it. I'm going to put them in because I think I haven't left enough leaves there. And I'll come back to that as well. I can work on this other one. Now this one, I put that lovely light colour on because the sun is hitting this sort of odd tree trunk here, making a lovely light spot, and sort of up here too. So I'm going to just wet that where those sunspots are, because they're kind of a soft pattern, and then grab my dark color. I'm going to start closer to the bottom of the trunk, or whatever it is, branch, trunk. And I'm not going to come up to that wet patch for a while yet because it's still wet, too wet, but I'm going to come around this edge that's darker. And because it's not as close as the other one, I'm not going to do as much texture in it because otherwise that'll be too much. It'll be overkill. Now it gets tricky as I go over this wet part. I'm going to use a thirsty brush, clean it up, dry it up on my towel. Use my thirsty brush to control that little bit of wet that I put there to get that sunlight. I've got very dry brush now because I don't want a lot of wet paint on it. I want to suck a little bit back here. My thirsty brush, clean brush, wash it, dry it, suck a little bit of paint back here. And continue up the trunk. And this one is going to come up here and disappear up here. Remember, as they go away from you, they get thinner. Not only do they get thinner by growing thinner as they grow away from the tree, but perspective makes them thinner too. Remember to get this nice curve. It was such a beautiful curve of this branch as it went across this opening here. Now we don't want to go too far with these branches because we do want to put some leaves in over here too. So we're just starting some of these branches, and then we're going to come back and work on leaves again, you know, because there'll be breaks here where we want to put a lot of leaves. So I can leave a couple of breaks in the branches there and come back and work on those later. And I'm just putting a little bit more texture on here with another layer of paint. It's amazing how it lightens up as it dries and then looks too light. And if I want it more in shade, I'm just going to add Ultramarine Blue to it. Get a bit more shade just here. I'm sort of dragging my thirsty brush that's clean and fairly dry. I'm kind of dragging it through the paint to make it streaky here. Deliberately streaky. And another thing I can do when it's dry, it's not dry yet, but we'll pretend. When it's dry, I can take a clean wet brush or damp brush and I can start to tease out some little lighter spots in the trunk. Really, I should wait for it to dry to do that. But I mean, you can sort of do it when it's partially damp. It's easier to do when it's dry, so that I can tease out some more texture. And you can definitely do that. See, if you do it when it's too wet like this, you get a bit too much taken out. But you can definitely pull out extra texture when it's dry, which is quite satisfying. And even this area down here where I left the sunlight, sometimes it's too hard a edge, so when it's dry you can just agitate it with a wet brush and give it a bit of a dab with a Kleenex, and you can get a much softer sunlit shadow there. I just want to add a little bit more shadow in. Even even on this left hand side of the trunk right here is a bit of sunlight, so I'm just going to put my wet brush on there and pull a little bit of paint off, and I can go over that with a bit of the warm color later. So you can do a lot afterwards with the texture. Like I said, I want to put a bit of a wash over this so that's not quite so light. And I'm going to use my thicker liner brush, which is a number 2 script liner, not my 2/0, but number 2, and the branch color, the dark brown grey. And I am going to put a few more branches in before I get the rest of the leaves in. just to help me find my way when I start putting more leaves in over here. But I do need to sometimes leave some little spaces. Oh, I've got a great big blob of water in my sky. And sometimes I might need my thinner one. I'm just going to my thinner 2/0. I want these little branches here. They're much thinner. So I want to put a few of those in. There are some coming down from here. These ones coming down at the top of the picture, you know, they suggest how much big tree there is up where you can't see it, up higher. And again, I kind of go back and forth, you know, little ones, big ones, branches and leaves. Just find my way slowly, because you can't always find your way all at once. You get a bit lost sometimes. It's like, where is everything? You know, we have this big branch here, come down into a bunch of leaves. This one goes off here. It has a big one coming down here, and I don't want to put too much in, but I do want to. I haven't put the ones coming down this way. I just didn't want all those in there. It was closing up this end too much. And I think before we do all of the leaves coming down here, we just want to do a little bit more texture on the beach as well. I know I'm skipping around a bit, sorry. I'm trying to sort of show you how everything goes before we run out of time. I'm taking the light grey that I used for the trunk and everything, and I'm going to add a little bit more texture to the beach. I add a little bit more cobalt in with that, so that's a little bit more blue. And what I want is sort of like rocks, little rocks sort of here and there, little, you know, on the beach. Just lightly putting some beach, a bit more in, you know, that you can see on the beach here. This is my Cobalt Blue and raw sienna and burnt sienna. A lot of water, so it's quite light. And another thing that you can do if you want to. I'm going to cover up most of the sky and the ocean, and I'm going to tap my big brush that has the grey on. Maybe just got a bit of splatter to suggest the, you know, the rocks and the stones on the beach. It just helps. It means you don't have to fill in quite as much with little bits of painting. I'll pop that on. I'm going to move my cloth back. Maybe just gently get rid of a few of those. And with that bluey grey, I'm going to put the shadow that's cast with this. That's Ultramarine Blue, Cobalt Blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. This tree is casting some shadow. Shadows, especially with like Ultramarine Blue and even a little bit of the Quinacridone Rose, make it a little bit purple, always makes a beautiful shadow, and that suggests sunlight. I'm putting that shadow under the tree there. I added a little bit of Quinacridone Rose to that grey blue, just to warm it up a little bit. There is shadow under here. I'm going to put a little bit of Cobalt Blue into it because it's slightly more blue as it comes out over the beach. More water. You don't want it too dark. It's just a shadow. It comes up to the beach. And remember to have some breaks in there so you can see the sand through it. A few rocks are over here a bit more. I'm going to just add a little bit more dark, just there under the tree on the edge of the shadow. And my small brush, I just want to do a few reflections of the rocks coming down into the ocean. They sort of come down under the rocks and then come along in the waves a little bit. That's just the sort of the grey brown of the tree trunk, the rocks. It's quite a blue colour as it comes back here. It grabs a little bit more ultramarine blue. Pull that along a little bit. Now it's not quite dark enough, so I want to grab a little bit of, while it's still wet, I'm going to grab a little bit of the burnt sienna and raw sienna. I'm just going to drop that in close to the edge while that's wet. I don't want to do too much detail, not necessary. A little bit. The detail on the rocks. And when I've got that darker color on my brush, maybe I'll just put a few more rocks in that are a little bit darker. Now my trunk is too light, the texture is too light, so I'm going to fix that by getting I'm going to get this palette that has all this mess on, and if I mix all of this mess together, I'm going to get a nice sort of a grey, blue, grey, brown colour. Nice and watery, and I want to cover most of that trunk with that, because the texture is too light. I'm going to have it a little bit light in the corner here. Now the tree still has texture to it, and I can put more on with dark paint when that's dry, and I will probably do that with a few more thin dark lines. But for now, that'll take it down a little bit. Another thing you can do, I don't do it very often, but you can scrape into things to give it dark lines if you want to. Some brushes, I'm just looking for my brush roll, there it is. Here we go. Some brushes have an angled piece to them, and this is specifically for scraping. And if you scrape the paper, you will actually make dark lines as you distress the paper, and the paint sinks into those dark lines. Now you don't want to do this early on, because this is going to slightly damage your paper. So it's something you want to do, you know, as you're finishing something, if you want to do it. I'm just giving you options. But painters often use this for grass or for rocks. The other thing you can do is like scrape bits of rocks with this. But it is great for giving tree trunk texture. And when that's dry, I will put a few more dark lines on there. And all that's left now is to sort of finish off the leaves on the right hand side, using, you know, the colors that we've been using. Grab some nice on my very dirty palette, I'm grabbing some lemon color, pop that on. Over the top here is quite lemon. There's some coming down here, and of course as you go over the top of the cerulean, it will turn a little bit green. And remember to keep it fairly open in places so that you can see your background, your ocean and everything behind it. So I want to put the lightest color, the lemon, on first. And then go into my medium green, my sap green. And let that come up against your lemon. Try and keep it fairly loose. Try not to tighten up too much with your leaves. Coming just below this branch, you can see some of the leaves just sticking out below it. A few in here, but don't close up the space. It's not entirely closed up. You can see the ocean through it. You can see the background. Remember to keep that. And if you get lost as to how your leaves connect, don't forget you can at the same time, like this one sort of connects with the branch here, you can put them in as you go. If you feel like you're getting lost as to where stuff's going, just pop them in as you go. It gets a little bit darker as it comes down here, and you can actually see a little bit more. This branch is quite big, isn't it? Actually see quite a bit more of it like here. I want to put that in. And the leaves come up to the next branch over here. And this is really where I kind of work back and forth. I can find the branches now where they're going. Add them in. Sorry, it's on a bit of a slant there. I didn't mean that. And then there's not a lot more to do. And I know, I'm sorry, we're rushing towards the end. And as these ones come down here, again, there's a little bit more that sort of burnt sienna color mixed with a little bit of yellow. And also up here, grab a little bit of that burnt sienna and orange, so that you've got a little bit of variety. Some of these are quite dry, quite orange. I got that burnt orange there. And then back into the green. Much more open up here, much more open up there. And if you want to make sure that they look like maple leaves, the only place to really sort of do that is up close. If you wanted to just make some of the closer leaves a little bit more defined, and the rest of them all just kind of blobs. You really can't see the shape of the leaves too much. You know, they have that pointy look. And as this trunk is drying up, I can show you that I can put a few more details and dark lines on it. You know, there's some dark spots. A few more dark lines, shadows. And so forth. And also, once these rocks back here are dry, you can do just a little bit more definition on them. Just a few little lines to make them look a little bit more rocky. Not too much, just a little bit. And then there's not much more to do, but we are very close to running out of time. The only thing that I would keep working on is just, you know, a little bit more in the way of leaves. Just a few more on some of these branches. They're kind of a little sparser up here, and maybe a few more branches. I like to really take my time with that and come back to it later and see where I need a few more. This one down here is kind of leaf heavy. And I think on one of mine I sort of came off the edge of the paper here, but I think if I just come to a little point there, that's good enough. I don't have to come right to the edge. And I don't need very much more. I may need a few more little branches, maybe a few more leaves coming down here, a little heavier. I feel like the picture is a lot heavier coming down here, so maybe I'm really getting loose now. I'm grabbing some of my lighter paint. Yeah, so and then a few more branches and we're pretty much good to go, I think. I do think I need just a little bit more shadow. Grabbed way too much paint. I feel like it should be a little bit more shaded under here. It's coming down. Good enough. Good enough. That's that one. Oh, and it's a bit crooked. That's, you know what? It's always nicer with the tape off, isn't it? Let's just see it with the tape off. I will do, when it's dry, I'll do just a few more branches and probably just a few more leaves, just to give it a bit more definition when it's dry. Yeah, it's a little bit neater and tidier with the tape off of there.